Now it's time for Lefty's Losing It. It's what you've been waiting for. Here is another edition of Trump derangement syndrome. Talk about warped and weird, starting with our friends over at The View for their odd take on the assassination attempt.
It was, a 20-year-old lone wolf, white, whack job with easy access to a gun. And we have to have a conversation about that, because it wasn't a drag queen, it wasn't an immigrant, it wasn't a pissed-off liberal woman.
The shooter, yes, it was a 20-year-old kitchen worker from nearby Bethel Park in Pennsylvania. According to a CNN report, a senior law enforcement official said that he bought 50 rounds of ammunition from a local gun store hours before the rally. Shouldn't that have been reported? Somebody buys a 20-year-old white guy? I mean, we've seen that many times now, young white men with guns.
Is The View seriously trying to blame this all on white men? Of course they are. What else would we expect from those loons? Now here is a fascinating account of what happened in Pennsylvania. Take it away, Jen Huger.
Hey guys, Trump's been shot. When he got up, he was bleeding from the ear, but he seemed perfectly fine. He's not dead. He's fine. Like, my best guess, and this is just a guess because he was just shot, is that he it looked like a BB gun or something.
Yes, over to you, FBI. It was a BB gun. Now, has someone checked in on this next guy? Because he seems to have given attempted murders a heck of a lot of thought.
I'm not saying that I would ever try to assassinate a presidential candidate. All I'm saying is that if I went through all of that trouble, I wouldn't miss. I wouldn't graze that. He wouldn't be able to raise a fist. I would finish the job.
What can we say? The left are truly unhinged lunatics.
There are a few people who think it was staged. And to be fair, I've seen employees at Claire's with better aim. I guess when you have bone spurs that bad, that's the closest you're actually going to get to any action. But as they say in any other pew-pew related incident, thoughts and prayers, I guess.
No thoughts and prayers for you, my dear. And check out Tenacious D at their concert right here in Australia.
Happy birthday to you. Make a wish, Canada. Don't miss Trump next time.
And that was Tenacious D taking D for deranged a little too seriously. Deport them. Get rid of them. We don't want you here. Now, it wouldn't be a Lefty's Losing It without the gender benders. Here is a brand spanking new user manual to know if you're gender fluid.
You have tried to be trans. But there are some days that you just aren't. And you know you're not cis. Number 2, if you've ever tracked your gender fluctuations to try to get sense of this whole thing, tracking your gender, clears everything up. Number 3, you taught yourself to tuck or pack or tried on some fake boobs and it felt so right that you cried so much that you didn't want to take them off, but then the next day, they didn't feel like anything at all. Number 4, you have come out at least 3 times as 3 different things. I'm bisexual. No, I'm pansexual. No, I'm trans. No, I'm gender fluid. No, I'm a gender fluid trans woman.
Look, I know the feeling. I too have come out at least 3 times as 3 different things. Tired, hungry and grumpy. Happens all the time. Maybe I need that user-friendly manual. Now, we all know about national pride. Well, move over. There's a new kid in town.
Did you know? Pan Pride is a day meant to recognize pansexual and panromantics people's efforts to be accepted and understood within the community. Whereas Pan Visibility Day, which is on May 24th, is aimed to celebrate and recognize those who identify with pansexuality or are panromantic.
Now, look, admittedly, I thought she was talking there about frying pans, but thank goodness she clarified that one.
Today, when it comes to romantic and sexual attraction, Many pansexual people refer to themselves as gender blind. This is usually defined as not being limited in sexual choice, with regard to biological sex, gender, or gender identity.
So not talking about kitchen utensils. Whoops. Now, this college student who identifies as non-binary is lending a helping hand, offering some words of wisdom on how kids can notify their teachers before the school year begins that they too are non-binary.
So let's talk about an easy way to go about that and maybe avoid that first day, embarrassing moments. So what I did for most of high school, where I was out as non-binary, I emailed all of my teachers beforehand. It's good to get that over with ahead of time, and it saves you having to do it face-to-face. It saves them from dead-naming you, misgendering you in front of a group, and then you having to correct them, which is a whole hassle. So it's really easy to do this, or you can even handwrite a note if you can't email them, and give it to them right as you walk in the door. And I hope that saves a little bit of embarrassment and stress and discomfort and just dysphoria for anyone who's starting off the school year and is a little nervous. As a future teacher, I know that a lot of teachers want to help.
Well, apparently that's the future of the education department right there, ladies and gentlemen. Not even schools are safe from the lefties. And take a look at this ingenious proposal for kids.
Can't trust a child to know themselves and their body. Therefore, I propose that all children be put on puberty blockers before they hit puberty. If they're not trans, cool. They can get off puberty blockers and continue puberty as they were. And if they are trans, then you just save them a lot of emotional pain from the secondary sex characteristics they have. If you say that kids are too young to know whether or not they are trans, then that means that kids are too young to know whether or not they are cis.
You know, she's exactly how I pictured her to look. They all look the same, don't they, when they make their deranged commentary? Of course, I mean, it makes total sense. Destroy a generation with puberty blockers in case they may or may not want to give the trans world a crack. Now to everyone's favourite trans activist, Jeffrey Marsh. Been waiting for him to pop up. Well, cue that jukebox, Jeff.
Leg hair and sexy.
Oh, he's got me in the mood. And guess what? JK Rowling still lives rent-free in his head.
Is J.K. Rowling part of a global hate group? The United Nations said yes. UN Women released a statement. This is the council at the United Nations that looks at women's rights globally. They announced a statement saying the gender critical movement, which is what they call themselves, aka the TERFs, are part of a global movement to undermine women's rights. TERFs hold a hierarchy in their mind of which women are better than other women. And my eyes were like, boing, 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 at this part of the statement. TERFs are involved in these interesting hobbies in addition to undermining feminism around the world. Here's your definitive answer. Every time somebody is like, J.K. Rowling she's not really transphobic, is she? Send them over to the United Nations. Thanks for fighting, and thank you for being part of our movement of peace and love and kindness. Bye.
Oh, Jeffrey, the United Nations. What a credible organisation. And we have to end on CNN commentator Van Jones losing his mind over Trump's new VP, JD Vance.
JD Vance is an ideological nationalist. That's a much more dangerous virus because he can polish this stuff and make it seem palatable to people. He can sell this stuff to Silicon Valley. He can sell this stuff other places. And what it does is it locks the Republican Party on a pathway that I think is dangerous for the world. Again, the Ukrainians are now in deep trouble. NATO is now in deep trouble. Trump he could have gone with a Nikki Haley and signaled to the world, hey, listen, I got to give stuff to my base, but I'm not going to abandon the world. This pick is a horror on the world stage.
Well, it's the news we have been waiting for. Ohio Senator JD Vance has been selected by Donald Trump as his vice president.
This is an announcement on Truth Social by former President Trump. He has selected Ohio Senator JD Vance as his vice presidential pick, and this is what he writes. After lengthy deliberation and thought, and considering the tremendous talents of many others, I have decided that the person best suited to assume the position of Vice President of the United States is JD Vance of the great state of Ohio.
Joining me now is Newsweek Senior Editor-at-Large and Article 3 Project Senior Counsel, Josh Hammer. Josh, great to see you. Look, it was only a few months ago you actually made the case for JD Vance. Tell us a bit about him and why you think he is indeed the best pick to be Trump's running mate.
Yeah, look, I am thrilled. I am absolutely overjoyed. I am over the moon for someone who I've considered to be a friend for a few years now, which is JD Vance. And it's not just that he's a personal friend. He actually also happens to be the very best pick that Donald Trump could have made at this precise moment. So let me explain why that is the case. If you go from 2016 to 2020 and you compare Trump's exit polling from one election to the next, he actually made inroads in basically every demographic imaginable, whether it's blacks, Latinos, young voters, immigrants, essentially every demographic, other than the demographic that actually delivered him the 2016 election. White, working class, and middle class voters, especially in the heartland, in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt areas, places like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, the voters who came out in droves to deliver those three key Midwestern states to Donald Trump in 2016. JD Vance is the guy who literally wrote the best-selling book, Hillbilly Elegy. He is the guy who can bring those voters back to home on the campaign trail. He's also someone who was only 39 years old. I'm 35. We're both millennials. JD speaks, I think, to our generation's frustrations with how our prior generations, how the boomers, frankly, have really sold out younger Americans when it comes to the neoliberal agenda, when it comes to free trade as a value unto itself. But, you know, it happens to be that that trade comes at the expense of manufacturing, of resilient supply chains, and good, well-paying jobs here on the home front. It happens to be that those neoliberal elites of the boomer generation have engaged in all sorts of feckless boondoggles overseas and on a foreign policy stage here. JD Vance is a very eloquent spokesman for those particular causes there. He's also just in line with where the party is right now. He is the man for the moment. His views on the future of the right, on the future of American conservatism, on the future of all the major issues, immigration, trade, foreign policy, political economy. He is in touch. He has his finger on the pulse, and he's very, very, very well spoken on the campaign trail as well. He's the right pick, and again, I'm just so personally thrilled at this.
Look, I mean, I think you're right as well about that youth factor because he brings something different to the table. I've got to say, Josh, it's interesting because it hasn't always been smooth sailing for JD Vance and Trump. He once called him America's Hitler, but here is JD Vance admitting that he was wrong about the former president.
I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Brett. He was a great president, and it's one of the reasons why I'm working so hard to make sure he gets a second term. I think you should. When you're wrong about something, you should change your mind and be honest with people about that fact.
Josh, is JD Vance a bit of a secret weapon almost because he's about to convert more people like he had to himself?
Yeah, you know, I find that very relatable because it's very similar to my own trajectory. So back in 2016 in the Republican presidential primary, I was just graduating law school at the time. I was a very outspoken supporter at the time of Senator Ted Cruz's presidential campaign. And I actually got a shout out in his Iowa caucus victory speech. I was very active in the Ted Cruz campaign. And I also had a very harsh language for Donald Trump at that time. I don't think I literally called him America's Hitler, but there were many of us who were caught up in the moment. It was a very important presidential primary. It was a very important election in 2016. And like JD Vance and like so many others, I have been won over. Donald Trump had a very successful 4 years as president. Did he make mistakes? Sure. I would not have handled COVID-19 lockdowns and vaccines, for instance, the exact same way that he did. But by and large, he was an extraordinarily successful president. The world was very stable. It was peaceful. There were no major wars at that time. The economy was thriving. The black unemployment rate here in America reached its absolute lowest number in the entire history of that statistic. The economy was roaring. The stock market was soaring. I could go on and on here. So at this point, I mean, who cares? Really, seriously, who cares what you said 8 years ago? It matters whether or not you are a passionate supporter of the president's agenda right now, and JD Vance clearly is that.
Absolutely, completely agree. I mean, it's what matters now that counts for sure. Now, look, let's talk about the ridiculous and inflammatory rhetoric we've seen from Joe Biden and the Democrats that led to the attempt on Trump's life.
Donald Trump is a genuine threat to this nation. He's a threat to our freedom. He's a threat to our democracy. He's literally a threat for everything America stands for. They fan the flames of political violence that are a threat to our personal rights. Most importantly, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, Trump is a threat to this nation.
And as we know, Biden also told donors, we're done talking about the debate. It's time to put Trump in a bullseye. But here is Joe Biden overnight having very public hallucinations, denying he engaged in such insightful rhetoric.
Have you taken a step back and done a little soul searching on things that you may have said that could incite people who are not balanced?
Well, I don't think, look, how do you talk about the threat to democracy, which is real, when a president says things like he says? Do you just not say anything because it may incite somebody? Look, I've not engaged in that rhetoric. Now, my opponent is engaged in that rhetoric. He talks about there'll be a bloodbath if he loses, talking about how he's going to forgive all the, actually, I guess, suspend the sentences of all those who were arrested and sentenced to go to jail because of what happened in the Capitol.
Yeah, Josh, the Biden gaslighting continues.
Yeah, it really does. And look, one thing that I think it's worth focusing on there, you know, they've used this bloodbath talking point now over and over again. They're saying that Donald Trump is threatening a bloodbath. They're trying to portray this offhand comment as possibly foreshadowing a second January 6th, you know, a nefarious insurrection if Republicans retake over. That comment was made in a very specific context where he was talking about the fact that the auto industry in Detroit, Michigan might face a bloodbath if the Biden administration's feckless policies when it comes to EVs, electric vehicles in China and Mexico are not reversed when he is president. So, you know, they've taken this very, very minor comment and they have disingenuously gaslit the American people into the next coming of Hitler or Mussolini. It's disgusting stuff, absolutely disgusting. But Joe Biden has absolutely positively been just as guilty as MSNBC, as Rachel Maddow, as Joy Reid, as any of the far left commentators here in America. He has been personally just as guilty as any of them when it comes to taking this rhetoric and taking it 10,000 degrees hotter and more fiery than it should be. But unfortunately, this is not an isolated phenomenon. The left has a very long and sordid history in America of taking talking points and then inciting violence around it. Unfortunately, this is just the latest and starkest example, but these people, Joe Biden in his Oval Office address Sunday evening here in America, if they are calling for unity and for us to take down the temperature, do us all a favor and look in the freaking mirror, because if you are not willing to at least do that modest of a step, then just shut up and go home.
Oh, well, you're spot on, because, I mean, here are the comments from the White House today. Are they going to stop the inflammatory remarks?
The view is that Trump and the MAGA Republican agenda is a threat to democracy. So how do you get that message across while bringing the temperature down? How is that phrasing going to be replaced? Is it going to be replaced?
Well, look, what I can say is this. We have our differences, and it's okay to have our differences. And it is okay to speak to someone's record, to speak to someone's character.
Josh, Karine Jean-Pierre, they're basically confirming that all the Democrats have is the hateful rhetoric up their sleeves.
Well, you know what's funny is that Democrats are actually starting to concede out in the open that they do not think that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. And the reason that I know that is because you have more and more Democrats, both in the commentator class and the chattering class, as well as the elected official class, who are now just saying that they're fully expecting a Trump win. They know what's happening at this point. To be clear, I mean, the Democrats have a lot of tricks up their sleeves. I don't like this talk that it's all over. We'll see. But he is looking good. Donald Trump's obviously looking good. And you've now seen some op-eds like Jared Golden, a centrist Democrat from Maine, who published an op-ed a couple weeks ago saying Donald Trump's going to win the election and that is okay. And you've actually had an increasingly large number of Democrats actually now say this because they have to run away from Joe Biden on the campaign trail because he's so catastrophically unpopular. But you can't have it both ways. If you are okay with Donald Trump winning an election, then by definition, he is not an existential threat to democracy. You literally just cannot possibly have this both ways. So look, there actually is one movement in America right now that is something of an existential threat to democracy. It is the street thugs and hooligans of the far left. It is the idiots who are out there the day after the inauguration in 2017 under the guise of the so-called Women's March that were vandalizing property and were smashing windows and looting back in Washington, D.C. in 2017. These are the Black Lives Matter Antifa radicals that cost billions and billions of dollars of property damage and untold other number of heinous offenses during the St. George Floyd summer of love in 2020. And then these are the same pro-Hamas people since October 7th that are burning down America's university campuses. So there actually is one movement in America that is a massive, massive existential threat, dare I say, to democracy. It is not Donald Trump. It is not MAGA. It is not America First. It is actually the street thugs of the far left.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Now, look, Donald Trump has had a huge win. A judge has dismissed his indictment over mishandling classified documents.
This is massive news. We did not see this coming at all. This is a case that she tentatively postponed to a later date. The original trial was set for the end of May. She moved it back a couple of months, though not setting a date. She has just dismissed it in a 93-page court document saying that Jack Smith, the special counsel's appointment, violates the appropriations clause and the appointments clause of the United States Constitution.
Josh, explain this decision to us.
So this is a brilliant decision by Judge Cannon. It is vindication for those of us who have been saying exactly this for a while now. Justice Clarence Thomas on the U.S. Supreme Court recently gave this exact argument a lot of purchase in his concurring opinion in the Trump versus United States, the presidential immunity case that came out a couple weeks ago. So look, the way it works here, you saw the Fox News commentator. We have what's called the appointments clause in Article 2 of our Constitution. Article 2 is what establishes the executive branch. And the appointments clause basically says that there are two types of executive branch appointments. One, there are principal officers, meaning cabinet officials, basically cabinet heads. And for those officers, it's old school advice and consent. So the president nominates and the Senate confirms by a majority vote. Then you have inferior officers, which a cabinet head can appoint on his own initiative, but you still have to be able to do so, quote unquote, by law. That's the constitutional language. Now, the obvious legal question is, does the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, does he have the law to actually, on his own initiative, to unilaterally authorize the creation of a brand new special counsel to investigate the former president of the United States? It turns out that no, he actually does not. If you go and actually look at the statutes that Jack Smith purports to cite to give him the authority to do so, there are 4 or 5 random subsections of other statutes that actually really have nothing whatsoever to do with a special counsel. So the actual authorization is not there. Congress did not authorize him to take this action. So it's really just a straightforward act of separation of powers. And, it's funny because the judge here, Aileen Cannon, here in Florida, where I live, she has been excoriated by the media for the better part of a year now. They've been calling her a MAGA judge, a Trump sycophant, because she's being very slow and steadfast and fastidious and meticulous in all of her various pretrial motions and hearings. But you know what? She has been exactly right, because we are in uncharted waters of uncharted waters here. We're dealing with the first ever prosecution of a former president of the United States, for God's sake. She has done the correct and courageous thing here. The relevant question that I have right now is whether or not the other district court judge in the other special counsel probe, that'll be Tanya Chutkan in the Washington, D.C. probe, the January 6th case, will she go ahead and now do the exact same thing? That remains to be seen.
Well, we will find out soon, but you're right. Good on her for being so meticulous and coming out with the right outcome. Josh Hammer, good to speak with you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.